Hello, hello, and happy Monday, everybody. I hope that you are well. For those of you who are mothers and celebrated Mother's Day, happy belated Mother's Day. I hope that your Mother's Day weekend was awesome and amazing. I had an action packed, fun filled weekend, primarily because my youngest daughter graduated. So I'm super excited about that. Yes, I am a mom and I enjoyed my festivities over the weekend. And I'm here today with you. So thank you so much for tuning in. Listen, guys, I'm super, super excited that you're joining me today. I'm Karissa Span, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. And today we are talking about things that you should know about voucher assisted programs. So many of you who followed me, you tuned in last month. Throughout the month of April, it was National Fair Housing Month. And so I'm going to further the conversation pertaining to voucher assisted programs. Listen, there are a lot of things going on throughout the country pertaining to housing, renting to individuals, people, and families who are in some sort of housing subsidized programs. But I believe that many landlords there are some things that you should know before deciding to or not to rent to individuals who are in voucher assisted programs. Before I get into the discussion, let me just also share the disclaimer here that I am not an attorney. I do not provide legal advice. However, information that I share is of the industry, best tips, best practices. And by all means, if you have questions, if you have remarks, comments, or observations, please throw it in the comment section so that I could respond to it accordingly. I thank you for those of you who are watching on YouTube. I'm live on Facebook as well as LinkedIn. And as a matter of fact, this is what I do each and every Monday. I'm live right here on one of these platforms at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm sharing information to help landlords, to help tenants, and to positively impact as well as improve the entire rental community. Now, listen, when I'm live, it's not always about voucher assisted programs, but I am going to touch on that today because I know that there are going to be a lot of situations in the near future that I'm going to talk about and share because of what some people did not know. One of the things that I commonly say is this: what you don't know can and will hurt you. It costs you nothing but your time to show up to get this information, or if you're watching a replay on my YouTube channel, it costs you nothing but your time to get this information. And if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please stop what you're doing right now. Go to the YouTube channel. Find me there, Landlord Lyfe with Karissa Span. There you can find all of my replays from prior discussions and segments that I've conducted, helping landlords as well as tenants. But today is all about what you should know about voucher assisted programs. And so as we are thinking about the season that we're in, so we're in the month of May, this is the season where a lot of tenants, especially those who are in the voucher program, may be thinking about moving because we're now moving into the warmer months. And usually that is a heavier time of the year, May, June, July, as well as August. Typically, families do like to move around that time of the year. Now, obviously, they're not restricted to only move during that time, but because it's warming up, sometimes people just don't like to move when it's cold. Maybe it's a rainy season in the spring or the fall or the winter, and many tenants do like to move when the weather is warm. So it's typically around the spring, the summertime. All right. I want to just put that out there because as the federal government has begun to increase funding in some areas, not all jurisdictions, but the funding has increased in a lot of jurisdictions, meaning different states, different cities, different housing agencies have started to receive an increase in funding. That allows the agencies, the jurisdictions to help that many more families. So you're going to see waiting lists opening up so that people can apply. That's because they are trying to house more people as humanly possible. So what does that mean? It means we're going to see an uptick. We're going to see an increase of applicants and tenants who are actively searching for a place to call home. And it doesn't matter if it's an apartment, if it's a single family house, if it's a townhouse, if it's a condo, as long as the rental property meets the requirement, as long as it satisfies rent reasonableness where that's applicable, families are usually allowed to rent the property. But unfortunately, there have been a lot of red flags. There's been a lot of setbacks. There's been a lot of delay because some housing providers and landlords are not renting to tenants in these housing programs. So that's what I'm going to touch on today. So welcome to this thought-provoking and engaging talk show. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I have one mission, and that is, I see your comment coming in, thank you. But my mission today is to walk you through all this information to make sure that it's relevant. So whether you are a landlord, whether you're a tenant, whether you're a housing advocate, this is going to be easy for you to understand. And if there's any information that I share and it's not understandable, or maybe you have a question, don't be afraid to throw your comment or your question in the chat box, because I do respond when I'm live and online. All right, so today's discussion is all about what you should know about voucher-assisted program. That's what today's discussion is about. So again, if you're watching the replay, thank you so much. If you find that this information is helpful, please like, please tag, and share it with someone else. So as we are getting into, like I said, this spring, preparing for the summer season, a lot of tenants are now looking for a new place to call home. And what I want people to know and understand about voucher-assisted programs is this. It is a truth, and it is a hard truth that some families in housing assisted programs have made it bad for others. Now, that's not to say that all tenants are bad, okay? But that's also not to say that all tenants are good. But here is what I do want people to know about housing assisted programs. These are programs that participants must be eligible to obtain housing assistance. Now, it does not mean that the agency is going to screen the tenant for you. Landlords are still required to treat that tenant like they would any other tenant. And so if there's an application process that landlords are requiring applicants to complete or to go through, then that's the same procedure. The challenge comes in when landlords are creating a new set of rules or stipulations or changing the policy so that tenants in these housing or voucher assisted programs won't meet the criteria and otherwise they won't qualify, right? And so that's what I'm talking about today, because with the voucher assisted programs, I want you to consider that as income. And in many states and jurisdictions, a lot of people don't realize that this is actually protection for tenants. Being in a voucher assisted programs is income protection for tenants. And so sometimes you have this pushback from landlords who don't know or understand how the program works. Well, here's the thing about the program. Let me get into some fun facts, and let me just share some truths about the program. So I know that with the housing assisted or the voucher assisted programs, like I said, it does assist these tenants and these families to be able to pay the rent. All right. And so as a landlord, I want you to think about this. If you're new, if you're inexperienced, or maybe you are aspiring to become a landlord, when you hear Section 8, or maybe you hear about the rapid rehousing program or the veterans program or any other type of housing programs, because there are lots of housing programs, I want you to always consider the fact that it is income protected. Now, I know that many landlords believe that there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape and intrusive inspections and delays. They have all these issues and these worries and these um, frustrations, if you will, because they believe that the government is making it hard for landlords to rent their property out. Well, that's not entirely true. Now, while there may be slight delays, there are reasons why there might be a delay. But usually that process is streamlined. In many jurisdictions, that process should not. Now, this is not a perfect world. I'm not speaking for all agencies, but usually that process can take on average about 30 to 60, not more than 90 days for a family to go through that entire cycle, meaning that a tenant has been issued a voucher, they have an active voucher in their hand, they're looking for a place, they actually find the place that they want to rent. So again, it doesn't matter if it's an apartment, a house, there are different types of rental property, right? So the family identifies the rental home, they provide the voucher, they complete the application. Once that housing provider or landlord completes that application and all the required paperwork, um, that package or that paperwork is then submitted to the housing agency that's going to be responsible for making sure that the housing subsidy is paid to that landlord. Now, there is a process. Some agencies require or do have a rent reasonableness policy in place. So with the rent reasonableness, it's just making sure whenever you hear the term rent reasonableness, it just makes sure that the rent is affordable. So for instance, you cannot charge a tenant $1 million in a housing assisted program, right? You just can't do it. And so the rent reasonableness process will look at the rent that you are asking for. So if it's $2,000 a month, they're going to run a test to make sure that that rent amount is comparable with other rents in that community for the same style of rental property. So if it's a single family home with central air, let's say it's a 3-bedroom, they're going to run that rent reasonable test. They're going to look at other properties near your rental community where your rental property is. They're going to compare it to other like units. They're going to compare it to another single family home or other single family homes with the same features, with the same amenities, and they are going to look at the rent. And if they come back with the rent reasonableness test and they say, oh, well, we can't give you $1 million. We can't give you 3,000, which is what you're asking for. However, you can move forward and rent to this family if you would lower the rent. And then usually they'll tell you what that amount is. So they may say, well, we can't give you $1 million. Or maybe we can't give you 3,000, but maybe we can give you $2,839. They do, in many cases, give you an option to decide whether or not you want to accept a lower rent amount. But here's the thing. When it comes to voucher-assisted programs, these programs will definitely make sure that the tenant can afford to pay that rent and be in that home. Now, if it's a situation where, let's say, you have a tenant who is working, then let's say something happened, and then all of a sudden the tenant is not working. As a landlord, as long as that home is still in compliance, as long as that tenant is still in compliance with the housing program, the government will make sure that the landlord's rent is paid monthly. Now, I do want to put that out there, but now also let me share a couple of fun facts here because I want you to know this. The program provides stability, number one. So stability and consistency, because more than anything, when you have a rental property business, and one of the philosophies that I share so frequently is this: if you treat your business like a business, it's going to pay you like a business. If you treat it like a hobby, it's in fact and should pay you like a hobby. And so the voucher program provides stability. You know that you're going to have a tenant in place and you know that you're going to get paid each month. But here is another fun fact. It eases the pressure of tenants. And so let's go back to the scenario that I shared about the tenant who had a job, was working, then all of a sudden something happened, and now they are no longer working. Well, that rent is still going to be paid because the government is going to make sure that the rent is paid. That's going to reduce some stress and some pressure off the tenant, which would ultimately reduce stress and pressure off of the landlord. Now, when it comes to these housing programs, landlords do decide what tenant is going to be the best fit. So you can still screen your tenants, right? You just unfortunately cannot discriminate against tenants. Now, there are a lot of jurisdictions that will follow this source of income protection. So, housing assisted programs is a source of income, and for many states and cities, including Washington, D.C., this is a time for you to know and understand that there are legal protections for people who are in these housing assisted programs. Now, some states have no protection at all, while others have state protection or there is city or county protections. What I want you to know is this, and I know that some of you are investors and you're looking for more rental property and you're looking for tenants. You should always know and understand what the laws are in your jurisdiction. Many of the voucher assisted tenants may come through a federally funded program, but there are also local programs, meaning that the local government provides housing funding, or the federal government. If it's a federal voucher, the federal government provides housing funding for this tenant. Now, there are short-term programs and there are long-term programs. Here's what I would strongly encourage you to do whenever you have an applicant that says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, I like your rental property. I want to submit an application. You always want to know and understand if they are participating in any type of housing program. That's important for you to know. You also want to ask for them to provide you with a contact name, an email address, and or a telephone number for a housing worker or a case manager or housing specialist at that housing agency. You want to make sure that if they do in fact have a housing voucher, that they have it in hand, okay, and that it is not expired. Here's the thing. Sometimes, and I've had applicants that wanted to rent and they said, my name is on a Section 8 waiting list. Okay, that's nice. And thank you for sharing that information, Mr. and Mrs. Applicant. However, for us to treat you like you're in a housing program, you must provide a copy of the housing voucher. If their name is on the waiting list and they don't have a physical or digital copy of their voucher readily available, then please treat that as a regular applicant. They don't have it until they show proof that they actually do have it. All right. You want to make sure that they have it. It's not expired. And then you also want to look at how many bedrooms are on the voucher. The housing voucher does not and typically will not have a dollar amount on it. The voucher is not going to have a $5,000 price tag, although some applicants or tenants, they'll say, oh, well, my voucher will cover up to $6,500. Well, the voucher does not have a dollar amount on it. So you want to verify the bedroom size because the housing agency will have an approved rent or an approved payment standard for that specific bedroom size. Okay. It doesn't have a dollar amount. It's going to have their name. It's going to have the date that the voucher was issued. It's going to also have an expiration date. It's going to have their bedroom size. And it should also be signed by them as well as someone at the housing agency. And so if they come to you and they don't have these things, please make sure that you ask for it. Okay, that's what I want you to know about the voucher. I know a lot of people are coming to me and they have said, well, Karissa, I have an applicant and she said that the voucher will cover X amount of dollars. Well, did you see it on the voucher? That answer is no. You're not going to see that on the voucher. Now, you can ask for their payment standard. You can ask if there if there is some sort of documentation to show approved rents. Some housing agencies will have it on their websites, others do not. But please get that information. And if, let's just say, worst case scenario, you cannot get that information, it's not on their website, there are websites that you can go to check and verify the average rent amounts for rental property in your specific area. One platform that I like to use is called Rent-O-Meter. You can go to Rent-O-Meter, plug in the address, plug in the bedroom size, you push enter, and it will give you an average of what the rents are in that specific area. Now, in some jurisdictions, a lot of people are starting to use affordablehousing.com. That's another website that you can use. Play around with the different websites, see what works for you. You can also use a real estate agent if you choose to, but you always want to confirm and verify upfront. You should know what the average rent amounts are in the jurisdiction of your rental property. You want to do that because you want to make sure, let's say worst case scenario, you ask for $3,000. They come back to you and they say, well, Mr. and Mrs. Landlord, thank you so much for participating in our housing program. We cannot give you $3,000. However, we can give you $1,000, right? If you run a rent comp and if you can come up with other rental units, other units that are like yours, rather, in the range of what you're asking for, you provide that to them. Sometimes they will make a decision or redetermine, if you will, the rent amount for that property. But if you do absolutely nothing at all, you don't have any backup, you don't have any proof, and you're just upset because you can't get what you're asking for, but yet you don't want to take the lower amount, you don't know if you have room to really have a complaint or not. So please always know what the average rents are for your specific area. Okay, and again, you are ultimately responsible for screening all tenants. Please do not rely on other people to screen your tenants. You can use third-party platforms where the applicants or the tenants are responsible for paying for the background check. And when that's completed, they will send you a report to let you know that your tenant or your applicant has successfully completed the application process. The background check is available for you to review it. Please, by all means, do not wait for that tenant to be screened. Don't wait for someone else to do that for you. Unless you have, for instance, a property manager. And of course, if you have a property manager, that's something that they should be doing anyway. But I would never, ever, ever recommend not screening an applicant. Because when you do that, you run the risk of allowing anybody into your rental property. Even if it is a participant in the housing program, you still, and I know that some landlords don't really care about background checks for participants in the housing program. And I know that the laws have changed, meaning that you cannot automatically disqualify or deny an applicant based off of their background check who are participating in housing programs or not, right? But you still want to do your job, still go through the process. Even if you don't do anything with the information, at least you have it in that file and keep it on file. I had a young man, well, he's much older than I am. I think he's probably old enough to be my grandfather. Now, this was many, many years ago when I first got into property management. He and his wife, they self-managed the property. He made all the repairs, and looking at the quality of the work that was completed, he was not a skilled carpenter. And that's the nicest way that I can say that, okay? And this young man came to me by way of referral because I was managing property in that community, and the real estate investor, told this young man about me. And so my team and I, we went to the property, and it was one of the worst conditions I had ever experienced. To me, I could not understand how any human being in their right state of mind would rent their rental property in the condition of what it was to anybody or anything living. because that's how bad the condition was. He was so desperate to rent the apartments out to people that he didn't require an application. He did not conduct a background check. He just let people move in. Despite me giving him professional knowledge, like, sir, you really should consider, at the very least, even if you don't do a background check, at the very least, allow people to complete the application. Well, he didn't do that. He just let people move in. It was in a really bad part of the city where there were a lot of illegal activities, questionable activities, a lot of drug, high crime area, lots of things were going on in that specific block. Okay. And so if you ask me, it looked like it was a neighborhood hangout right in front of his building. He had boards on the windows and he was showing the rental property. He had people coming by taking a look at it with boards on the windows. So you couldn't even see the windows. Okay. And he had a strategy. He said when he get one unit rented, he would then take that money and start to fix up another apartment. Okay. I can't really tell a person what to do. That's his business policy. That's his business practice. So be it. Right. And it didn't quite work out the way that he conveyed it to me. He allowed tenants to move in, did not complete the application. So two tenants moved in, one on the first floor, one on the second floor. He promised to take the money to make repairs to the other units. That never happened. He just allowed the tenants to move in. And for whatever reason, they accepted the condition of the rental property. To me, it did look like a crack house. That is the nicest thing that I can say about that rental property. There was no way that I, as a professional, could put my name on anything in that condition because he just did not honor his word. He did not make repairs. The property should have been condemned. I told the gentleman, listen, let me help you bring in contractors, vet contractors, interview quality contractors that won't rip you off, that will give you decent rates to help you get your rental property up to code. He didn't want to do that because obviously he had his own agenda. So it turns out the tenants that he allowed to move in, eventually they stopped paying rent because repairs were not completed. There was a huge infestation problem that came from the upper unit, which had been vacant for a long time. He never exterminated. He also had rodents that were entering the property through the first floor level. And so there was a whole laundry list of things going on. And that is a sad situation that, if you ask me, I mean, he went from, I don't know, it's like he jumped out the pot, out the pan straight into the fire, especially by allowing tenants to move in without completing the application. So the tenants, those two tenants in particular, stopped paying the rent. Well, he wanted to take the tenants to court and he didn't even have the full people name. He didn't know their full first and last name. And it just went really bad, really quickly for him. I wanted to feel bad, but I can't feel bad for someone who refuses to take advice, who refuses to treat their business like a business. And in that situation, I think that's probably where I get the philosophy that if you treat your business like a business, it's going to pay you like a business. But if you treat it like a hobby, it's going to pay you like a hobby. So do your job as a housing provider to make sure that you understand the requirements, understand the laws. And even if you are renting to families and individuals in some sort of voucher-assisted program, number one, treat them with respect, but definitely screen them. Let them follow the same process that you allow others to follow, but then also make sure that you are treating everybody equal. Make sure that you are fair across the board. Please do not tell someone that you are not going to rent to them just because they are in some sort of housing assisted program, because there are laws, there are rules, there are regulations that do protect tenants who are in a voucher assisted program. So there are legal protections, but not just that, because like I said, this is considered source of income. There's legal protection for tenants. And just because you don't know the law doesn't mean that you are in good standing, especially if you're violating the law. So know what you can and cannot do. Now, there are some obligations as well as protections for landlords. So here's the thing. When it comes to these housing programs, remember I talked a little earlier about the inspection piece, right? At the end of the day, you as a housing provider should want your rental property inspected. You should always want to know the condition of that rental property. That is going to help you to help the property. You always want to protect your asset. You always want to preserve the quality of the rental property. And so having a housing agency to come out, conduct an inspection is only a win for you. Now, let's just say there's a laundry list of repairs that needs to be made, right? Well, consider that a good thing. At least you know what needs to be done versus you not knowing at all. Let's say there's a laundry list of issues. There's a laundry list of repairs or renovations that are needed. Now, let's just say you rented the property and you didn't know this. And over time, if you think about it, the repairs are not going to complete itself. The problems are only going to get worse. So yes, there should be a light bulb moment for you. If you're having any type of reservation, if you're hesitant about renting to people who are in voucher assisted programs, watch the replay, listen to some of the things that I shared. You're going to get a housing inspection. You're going to get a tenant who can afford to pay the rent. You're going to get paid monthly by the housing agency, as long as that housing participant remains in compliance, as long as that rental property remains in compliance. But now, like I said, we are going to see an uptick. We're going to see an increase of tenants looking for rental homes because a lot of these people have been on waiting lists for a long time. And now many of them in a lot of states and cities, they're starting to reach the top of the waiting list. They are now being issued vouchers. As a matter of fact, one of the things that I like to do is I have a whole separate channel just for tenants where I show people how to find and apply for low income housing subsidized housing all throughout the United States. So I'm showing people where to go to get housing. And this is something that's been around for a long time. These programs are not new. There are a lot of new organizations, however, that are now starting to offer assistance because they recognize that there is funding available to help families in need. All right. So I wanted to share that information. And I do see comments coming in. So let me pause. Hey, Jennifer, thank you so much for tuning in. Beautiful. Hello. Thank you so much, Preacher, for tuning in from the YouTube channel. You said, why don't they inspect your unit when the Section 8 tenant moves out like they do before someone moves in? That's a great question. And the best way for me to answer that is like this. They want to make sure that before the tenant moves in, that it meets the requirement of the program. So the property must be in compliance, right? So they're not doing a moving inspection on your behalf, although it does benefit you that you know the condition of the property. But the move-in inspection is to make sure that the property passes every requirement. Like it has to have running water, it has to have lights, it has to have outlets that are properly grounded. It has to, if it does have appliances, and some jurisdictions don't require certain appliances, but whatever is there, it must be operable. The doors must lock. And so there are certain requirements that must be met. And so that's why the housing inspection happens only on the front end and not the back end. And unfortunately, and I'm a realist, and I'm going to say it just like this, I'm going to go straight down the aisle here. The housing agencies, many of them don't really care how the property is when the tenant moves out. Now, if there are issues, and I do appreciate your question, if there are any issues, you would have to treat that tenant the same way that you would with any other tenant that moves out. I always recommend that if you have a tenant who's moving out, they give you a notice to vacate. You should always right away thank them for their time being there, unless you don't want to thank them. But definitely schedule a move out inspection. And one of the things that I like to do, and I'll say it like this: hey, Mr. and Mrs. Tennant, thank you so much for your time here. We regret that you are, or sadly, you're leaving us. We hope that your time has been most enjoyable, because we value you. And if you are thinking about getting your security deposit back, we strongly recommend scheduling a move out inspection with us. That way you'll know whether or not and how much of your security deposit you're going to receive. I also explained that they should conduct or schedule the move out inspection after they moved all their things out, after the property has been cleaned. And I always like to remind tenants, make sure that you return the rental property to the condition of what it was before you moved in, so that you can get your security deposit back. I like to share this information because tenants do not understand sometimes the role that they play. Sometimes people who are not educated, they just think that, okay, well, I'm gonna move out and I'll just leave all this stuff in and just let the landlord take care of it. I'll just leave the old furniture. It was trash anyway. I'm just getting my taxes done, so I can just buy me some new stuff, right? Well, all of that is at a cost, right? And so I tell tenants, listen, you want to schedule that move out inspection with me after you have moved everything out, because if we have to remove it, we're going to deduct that from your security deposit. Okay, so have those conversations early and upfront. But that's why the housing agencies do not conduct a move out inspection after the tenant moves out. So that's a great question. Absolutely. Are there any other questions that I'm able to answer? We're talking about participants in voucher assisted programs and what landlords must know, what people should know in general about these programs. Any other questions that I'm able to answer while I am live? And so I do encourage that if you are a landlord, maybe you have been skeptical. Maybe you have heard the horror stories. And yes, there are lots of horror stories, but there are also great stories. There are really good success stories of people who are in these housing programs. They will take care of the rental property, sometimes in many cases better than the owners. I have seen tenants who have put money into the rental property because they actually valued having a place to call home, right? So please don't stereotype or think that everybody is a bad seed or everybody's going to tear up your rental property. But if that is your mindset, and maybe you have experienced that, that's why screening tenants is so important. Conduct that background check. Some landlords are also conducting home visits of applicants before they move into their rental property. There is nothing, unless there's a specific law in your jurisdiction that stops you from doing it. There's really nothing stopping you from conducting a home visit if that is part of your application process. But just please make sure that it's clear and people know up front that, hey, part of our application process could consist of us conducting a home visit where you currently reside. And if that's your policy, put it in writing and then move on it accordingly. All right. So if you have any questions, any legal questions that you have, I would strongly and always recommend that you, number one, that you speak to a landlord and tenant attorney. If you have questions about the housing program and maybe the tenant is not answering the questions that you have, you can always contact the housing agency to get information, to understand the do's and the don'ts of that specific agency. Now, all agencies are not the same. I talked about the federal voucher. I talked about the local voucher. I talked about rapid rehousing. Rapid rehousing is a short-term program. In many cases, the rapid rehousing is there are permanent supportive housing programs. Those programs may not last as long as a federal voucher, but you don't know unless you ask those questions. And please don't assume, which is why I said a little earlier that if you have someone who comes to you with a housing voucher and they tell you that they are in a housing program, you want to know and understand which program they're in and a contact person so that you can contact at the agency to find out what you must do in order to make sure that your rental property is in compliance or meet the requirement of that program. I would rather you ask questions on the front end versus not knowing, not understanding, which sometimes can create a delay. And I don't know about you, but delays are never good for business. Okay. You want an applicant that's ready to move in, that's not going to take 30, 60, 90, 120 days. You want someone who's ready to move in right away. Now, with the housing agencies, let me just go ahead and say that although I said 30, 60, 90 days, there is a process. So it's not necessarily overnight, right? There may be some time associated with that tenant going through the process, going through the rent reasonableness test, getting it inspected, and then actually leasing up. But it should not take 6 months or longer. If you're going through that process, and I do know that some landlords have gone through that, and they reached out to me to say, hey, listen, it's been over 6 months and I'm still waiting. It should definitely not take you that long. And if you're treating your business like a business, you're not allowing it to take that long. Anything over 60 days, reach out. Hey, listen, it's 60 days. Are you still interested in renting my property? If you are, please provide contact information so that I can contact the agency, because time is money and you can't allow your rental property to be pulled off the market while you're just sitting around waiting months. And sometimes people have waited almost a year because they didn't know that they should have contacted the agency. And so that's why I do these segments every Monday. There's something different each week. I touch on different topics, different strategies. I'm giving you advice. I'm giving you information because I want you to be informed. In many cases, I provide information for landlords and for tenants, but today is specifically and all about landlords, helping you to understand what you should know about voucher-assisted programs. So I do hope that this was helpful today. All right, you said, could we contact them to get an inspection list so we could make sure our unit is up on their specs? Yes, you can definitely do that. I would recommend reaching out to that housing agency. Many of them do have an inspection checklist. They can provide you with a list of resources. A list of items that they're looking for. Now, it may not be, and usually it's not like an exhaustive list, but it does give you a full overview of what they're looking for. So one of the things that I would tell you, because I'm also a housing inspector, I would tell you from the exterior of the property, you want to make sure that, for instance, if there are steps, make sure that there are no holes, there's no tripping hazards. You want to make sure that if it's a rail out front, that it's sturdy, it's not wobbly. You want to make sure that there's no peeling, chipping, cracking paint anywhere. You want to make sure that if there's a storm door, that it locks. You want to make sure that it has a lock that does not, from the inside of the property, that does not require a key to get out, because that could be a problem. That could be a hazard in the event that a fire breaks out. If, for instance, if you have bars on your windows, and I know that a lot of people do, just depending on the area for safety, you want to make sure that that lock is a thumb lock, meaning that you can turn it with your hand and it doesn't require a key, because that would also be considered a fire hazard. You want to make sure that the door, it opens and closes and that it locks. You want to make sure that the knob is secure. You want to make sure that inside the home, in the living area, the living room, the common space area, checking the floors, no tripping hazards, no holes, no nails or anything like that. You want to make sure that your windows open and close with no problem. So when you lift it up, it should stay up, or when you open it, it should stay open. It should lock. Okay. It must lock. That's a requirement. You want to make sure that if you have, for instance, and I don't have one with me because this segment was not about inspections, but I do appreciate the questions. You want to make sure that, let's say, for instance, if you want to test your outlets to make sure they are properly grounded, you don't need to pay an electrician to do that. You can get what's called a GFI or a GFCI adapter. And so what you'll do is it's a little small device. You'll plug it into the outlet, and it's going to light up to let you know if there are any hazards. And you'll be able to look at the device. So let's say that you plug the device in and it has a red light. So when you look on the device, it's going to explain what the light is for. It's going to let you know if it's open grounded, right? And so you want to test all outlets throughout the home. Now, if it is a housing assisted participant, you definitely want to make sure that anywhere where there is a water source, so in the kitchen, in the bathroom, some areas in the basement have an outlet, like maybe in an older property, you have a wash basin, right, in the basement. If there's an outlet anywhere near a water source, you want to make sure that it does have a GFCI protected outlet. And the purpose of that is to make sure that if it overloads, let's say water get into it, that the outlet turns off the electricity at that socket. Okay, you want to make sure that, let's say in the bathroom, you want to make sure that the toilet flushes. You want to make sure that the toilet is stable. You want to make sure that it's not wobbly. Sometimes housing inspectors, I know one of the things that I do if I'm inspecting a rental property, I will gently lean on the toilet or I'll nudge it with my leg just to see if it moves. A toilet should never move, right? You want to check all those things. Make sure that the handles are not easily able to fall off. So when they turn the cold water or the hot water on, that the knobs are secure, right? You want to make sure that you look under the sink, make sure that there are no holes, there are no openings, there are no gaps for rodents or creatures or mice or anything to get in or out. Let's see here. Let's go to the kitchen. You want to make sure that the stove, it turns on. So if it's a gas stove, turn on every one of those knobs. You want to make sure that it comes on. You want to make sure that it lights properly. You want to make sure that the oven turns on. You want to make sure that those appliances are clean and working. Now, when it comes to the refrigerator, one of the things that I like to tell people is this: open that refrigerator. Look around the look around the seal, right? You want to look around that gasket, make sure that it's not ripped. You want to make sure that it's not torn, because if so, that would definitely fail a housing inspection. So they will likely look in the refrigerator. They're likely going to look in a freezer, and that's what they're looking for. They're going to look under the cabinets, want to make sure that the cabinet doors are not falling off the hinges. They're going to turn on the garbage disposal. You want to make sure that all those things work. Now, some housing inspectors are going to be as thorough as I am. If you have a garbage disposal, they're going to check under the garbage disposal to make sure that there's a Romex connector there. And just go through every area of that rental property. Even if you contact the housing agency and they don't give you a thorough list as what I just briefly explained, just go through every room. You want to look at from wall to wall, door to door, floor to floor. You want to make sure that there are no issues anywhere. So that's the best way that I would tell you to handle the pre-inspection, just making sure that you're prepared, because you want that rental property to pass inspection the first time, because if it fails inspection and if they have to come back out, then you've wasted time, and time is money. So you want to make sure that your rental property will pass inspection the first go round. So definitely use some of that advice and information that I gave you. And thank you so much for that question there. But I would definitely say, yes, reach out to the housing agency, ask them if there's a checklist that they could provide you for a housing inspection, because there usually is something that they can provide. If not, you can definitely search that or shoot me an email and I can send you a checklist of what you should do. So let me just also, I don't know if your rental property is a house or not, so I'm gonna go a little bit deeper for those of you who have a house versus an apartment. So another thing that they're going to look at, they may look at if there's an HVAC system. You want to make sure the filters are changed and clean. You definitely want to make sure that the rental property does have smoke detectors that are operable. Now, in many of the newer renovated properties, it is a requirement to have, for instance, the smoke detector hardwired. But if you have an older property that's kind of grandfathered in, you haven't done major renovations or anything like that, then in many cases, your standard smoke detector may be okay. You may be required to have Let's see. You want to have smoke detectors ready. You want to have batteries available because sometimes, let's say for instance, you have a smoke detector and then on the day of the inspection, the battery starts to die and the smoke detector starts to chirp. So make sure that you have batteries on standby when they come out to do the inspection, because I've seen inspections fail for such small things. Although it may seem small, it could create a larger issue if they allow a tenant to move in, something happens and that smoke detector is inoperable. So those filters, smoke detectors, batteries, make sure that there are light bulbs in all the light fixtures. Make sure that there are no hazards anywhere throughout the rental property. Treat it as if you're renting to your kids, if you have any, or your grandkids are going to live in that rental property. You want to make sure that it's safe. You want to make sure that there are no hazards anywhere in that property. So that's inside as well as outside. You also want to take a look, and one of the things I like to say is take a look at the exterior of the property. Sometimes owners don't really factor in the exterior. So, for instance, look at your gutters, look at the windows from the outside, take a look at the front, take a look at the side, if applicable, because it may be an interior row. You want to look at the front of the property, the back of the property. You want to see, look up, are there any window issues? Is your gutter hanging? Do you have a sleeve on the gutter, right? The downspout. Check all those things because it will matter, and you want your rental property to stand the test of time. So it's important to make sure that these repairs are taken care of, right? So whether you have a housing assisted tenant or not, you still want to preserve and maintain a good condition of your rental property, because at the end of the day, it is an asset, right? Treat it like a business. That way it will stand over the test of time. Now we know that things will come up, right? A pipe will break, a pipe may freeze, right? Something will happen over time. I mean, that's the nature of it. That's just life in general. So whether you live there or you rent it out to somebody else, something is bound to happen at some point. So do your inspections, whether you have a housing assisted tenant or not. Do inspections. I would say don't do an inspection less than twice a year. I know some people do them once a year. That's not enough for me, because if something happens, especially if there's a water issue, right? That's only going to cost more money. The longer that water issue lingers, it's going to cost more money over time if it's not repaired, right? And so do your housing inspections. Let the tenants know that you are coming to conduct a housing inspection. And many tenants do appreciate and value landlords who genuinely and truly will take care of the rental property and make necessary repairs. All right, so these are just some of the things that you should know when you are renting to housing or voucher assisted programs. All right, Welfare Office. I love that name. Thank you so much for tuning in on the YouTube channel. I noticed government give immediate housing to rate suicidal people. Okay, thank you for that. So the government will give assistance to whoever is in need. So whether now it could be rape, right? It could be suicidal people. There are lots of people in need of housing, right? So they can't discriminate, but there are pots of funding available for different categories of people in need. So yeah, you have, for instance, what's called the VAWA program. That's the Violence Against Women Act. That's for people who have gone through domestic violence, right? There's this big push to help people in different categories, depending on, what happens to them in life. There's assistance. The government is available and has funding available to help them. But I do appreciate that comment because it shows that the government do care about people. So thank you so much for that. Another program, and just speaking, as we're speaking about suicidal people, there are housing programs for people who are dealing with mental health, right? So you have Department of Behavioral Health or some sort of mental health agency to help individuals who have some sort of mental health issue or disorder, right? Because ultimately, they deserve to have a place to call home, right? Just because they have been raped or just because they are suffering with some sort of mental health or some other disability, because mental health is a disability, they still deserve a place to call home, and they need to be able to find somewhere to live and be able to, whether they are able to live independently or not, they still deserve a place to call home. And so the government has now realized and recognizing more and more that these type of individuals are protected. This is a protected class. Suicide, mental health, those are some disabilities, right? Those conditions are considered disability, and disability is a protected class. That's covered under the federal Fair Housing Act, which came about in 1968. But yes, these programs are available, and they are not going anywhere anytime soon. The best thing that landlords can do is screen all applicants. And again, if you have a participant or someone who comes to you through any of these type of housing programs that I've shared today, I talked about, or any others that I have not mentioned, always ask which program, always get a contact person name at the agency, always reach out. If you have questions about any inspection requirements, you can always contact the agency. You should go to their website, know how to reach somebody there to understand all the do's and the don'ts. All right. So I do appreciate all your questions, your comments. Thank you for your feedback. Thank you for tuning in on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. This is what I do each and every Monday. I'm right here, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I do appreciate you. Let me share my email address for those of you who do want to reach me while I am not online, and by way of announcement for those landlords and housing providers in the Washington, D.C. area. We have now partnered with some other community organizations for an in-person event, linking landlords with tenants, making sure that you get the right tenant. We're providing training. We're providing workshops for you. If you are interested, please email me. That is my email address at the bottom of the screen there, info@landlordlife.com. If you are a landlord in DC, you have vacant rental property, you're looking for tenants, you want to attend some of these workshops, you've seen me on YouTube, you've seen me on LinkedIn and Facebook. We want you there in person. We're going to kick this off within the next 2 weeks. So please email me, especially if you want to attend. If you're thinking about attending, email me so that we can add you to the list and get you more information. I do appreciate you all for tuning in. Tenants, I know I did not have a lot of information for you today, but stay tuned. Come back next week. I got something for you. So next week's segment is going to be for landlords and for tenants. So my time is up, and I do thank you for yours. I hope that this was helpful today. I do appreciate you. Please share this information. And again, if you have not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. I want to just say a final word and shout out to every graduate out there. I know that there have been a lot of graduations over the past weekend. Congratulations to all of you who are reaching higher heights and deeper depths. I look forward to seeing you all next week right here, Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. I'm Karissa Span, the abundantly blessed landlord and tenant expert. It has been a fantastic pleasure having you here today. I look forward to seeing you next week, 7:30 Eastern Standard Time.